joining the Citrix File Share and Data 443 ClassiDocs webinar. We're excited to show you a couple of new features today that are previously unannounced and also go through some of the existing functionality that we have within the product line. We've been focused considerably on working with the Citrix team, which actually happens to be in the same town as us, which is very handy, and also working on capabilities that work across the board from a business perspective to start tagging and organizing your content. We understand and appreciate that ShareFile has a very wide and varied user base. We've seen pretty well every industry represented by ShareFile. And also, more significantly, I think, is that that user base is distributed worldwide as well. We see many multilingual customers, and of course, organizations sharing data across geographic boundaries. So any sort of multinational or even small, medium business that has several offices involved. We've seen that use case happening throughout the Citrix environment. What I'm going to do is show you a few slides, go through a couple high-level concepts, and then actually demonstrate the capabilities for you. As we announced earlier this year, we've done a native integration with the Citrix infrastructure. What that means is we're able to classify, tag, and do discovery against content that might be shared in Citrix ShareFile. And what we've done most recently is done a direct connect integration as well, which I'll show you from within the ClassiDocs panel. So I'm the president and founder of Data 443. Again, thank you for joining. Like I said, we're going to be walking through the infrastructure and some of the desktop components involved in the solution. There is a Q&A that is to be product specific within the chat line, and hopefully I can get to some of those as well. I know we've got a couple previous ones that I can touch on as well. So without further ado, let's get into it. So, number one, what do we do for Citrix ShareFile? At a high level, we've had a lot of requests for has been data tagging to be done primarily for ShareFile analysis, content sharing, internal security analytics, and any sort of data protection. Now, what does that really mean? What that really means is that within ShareFile, once content is tagged, whether it's tagged as confidential or personal or internal or client XYZ or organization ABC, that content can be managed more directly throughout the ShareFile infrastructure. You can use these tags to organize content, manage security, access controls, and do other types of ShareFile specific within their cloud activities on the content. What we also find very important as well is, because there is a fair amount of content in the ShareFile infrastructure from you, a lot of that content is sensitive or should be treated sensitively. And from that perspective, you need to start wrapping security controls around it. And a security control could be as simple as making sure that you remove user access from the ShareFile infrastructure or review access every month, every year. Or it could also be saying we want our desktop DLP solution to start reading tags and make sure that specific content does not go to ShareFile or content from ShareFile is not stored locally, for example. So there's a lot of rules that you can start enabling once you actually know what is that content tagged as. It's really important to understand that. And it's also really important to understand that the users have a large say in how that actually works. Which really brings us to the next point. You are supposed to control the rules. And what we found throughout our history as ClassiDocs in general is that in a long-term perspective, the user base, the people who actually use the data, consume the data, and are largely responsible for the data, do not have direct interface or coordination with IT. And this is a long-term issue that has been going on for quite some time and is not unique to ShareFile or anyone else specifically. It's more related to the concept of allowing the end users to, essentially control their own destiny with the data set itself. So what we've enabled with ClassiDocs specifically is within the native Microsoft Office world, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook, these sort of things, the users are able to start coordinating and supplying information to the rule set. And these rules can be applied to the content that's stored anywhere, including Citrix file share. And then those rules are applied and enabled for the other interested parties. In this case, security analytics or any sort of data protection system. So we enable that with native Microsoft Office tools, and then we also enable the capability to not just tag a solution or tag a document, retag it, but also continuously tag it. So for us, and if you look at any sort of data security policy today, you'll see that the rules are actually fairly specific that content is not static. It's risk to the business, whether it goes outside or someone inside sees stuff they shouldn't see, changes over time. Something that was sensitive 2 years ago may not be sensitive anymore. And in reality, you need to have a system that's going to be able to reclassify, relook at this content on an ongoing basis, and apply the most up-to-date rules to it. So that's what we've done with the solution. We're able to retag content, continuously tag it based on rules supplied by end users and managed by an IT administrator or a governance person that can say this rule applies to this types of content, and I want ShareFile to act accordingly. Okay, and of course, our friend compliance. We've had obviously a lot of interest around GDPR, the interest in the California data privacy law, and soon the USA-based global law will be applying across all of your content repositories, and ShareFile will be included in that. So if you look at a GDPR request today, if you happen to be subject to those, you'll see that, of course, the DSAR request will apply to any content you have. That's going to be in a database, that's going to be on a file server, that's also going to be in ShareFile. Okay, so ShareFile needs to be included with that. If you're subject to other privacy or freedom of information requests or anything else related to a specific piece of content, whether it's personally identifiable information, whether it's even just a customer record, you would still need to search all these repositories again to get that information out. So not only do we classify information at a high level, saying, sensitive, internal, confidential, public, whatever your rules are for data classification itself, we also do explicit search for specific content. And you can enable that, of course, natively through the ShareFile infrastructure. But what we've also found is that you have a global scope to consider. You have laptops, desktops, files outside of ShareFile, and even potentially other cloud service providers. So all of these need to be covered as part of the use cases. So I'm going to spend just a few seconds on what GDPR looks like itself, and what are people looking for from a spirit of the legislation at a high level. In essence, you're responsible for managing customers' information as sensitively as possible. And this is really important to understand and manage appropriately, because now you've got this legislative requirements to do to fully manage the personal information of your customers directly and sensitively. So what that really means is that you now have to understand where everything is, understand the sensitivities levels, and then adequately protect it. And ShareFile is no different in this case. In our conversations with the Citrix folks, the requirements for this sort of stuff has come up fairly often. Is in addition to just doing in addition to just doing a global search, for example, for content, you need to expose an inventory, for example, to your IT group to say, listen, in all of these ShareFile repositories, we have this kind of information. This shared folder has confidential information. Did we know about that? How about these three folders that only the executive team is on, but somehow this other person has access to the same folder as well? We have no idea why, but now it's potentially exposing sensitive information, right? So what we're enabling you as the IT person, as a data governance person, enabling you to have a full inventory of the content that might be stored in ShareFile, have a full inventory of content stored in other repositories, and applying that same rule across all of that infrastructure, all in one solution. So we're pretty excited by that, and I hope you are too. So I'm going to skip the article stuff. GDPR in general, and we can say privacy requirements at a high level have these basic requirements, right? We need a discovery capability, we need a data catalog, we need some reporting, we need some governance, we need some orchestration. We need to have all these capabilities at a high level to be able to conform to any privacy requirement. And I say that just because freedom of information requests, if you're from Canada, you have the PIPA. We have a new Brazilian policy that just came out apparently as well. I forget the acronym there. It seems like it's a worldwide phenomenon, obviously, but they're all grounded in the same requirements: the ability to search, document, and potentially based on the user request, destroy or otherwise change that information that you have about them. The biggest thing, of course, is being accurate and valid. That's what we always see as a main requirement. Okay, now we're going to get into the demo. Pardon me. So what we're going to show you is a couple things. So if we flip over to my friend in the ShareFile world, we're going to have, you're probably pretty familiar with this. We've got some content in a bunch of folders. We've shared these. We've done some, basic Excel and text files and these sort of things. We've also enabled a little bit more content as well in some of the areas, and we've actually dumped a lot of test data in here as well. So you're going to see hundreds of Word documents and Excel sheets and everything else that are in here. So we've uploaded a bunch of information to ShareFile. We've shared it around, right? In this case, we're in as a user directly, and we're able to start classifying that information with rules. So when you're going to get started, what I wanted to show you was the ability to, number one, contact Citrix or go directly to us and ask for the ClassiDocs Citrix extension. This extension is built right into ClassiDocs itself. We can provide you a POC environment fairly quickly to have you attached to Citrix directly and have your system start classifying the information that's in ShareFile. You can also classify directly from your endpoint or your workstation or your server. And then you can map a drive to a web dev folder, which is essentially what ShareFile is you're able to classify that. So you can see more information on the Citrix website. You'll see a little bit on our website as well. We'll send out these links after the call with the recording for you. And then what I'm also going to show you is that the fact that we've actually mapped a drive itself to ShareFile, okay? And this is something you probably do every day. You're seeing that we're browsing the same content that's in the ShareFile system, and it all matches up, and it's all the same stuff. So folder 0, folder 1, and we've got the explicit content in there. Just prior to the demo, I added the classification system to Citrix and had it attached to the infrastructure. So what I'm going to show you right now is exactly how we do this. And you'll see that we have a very simplistic approach. This is something that we would do as part of any sort of infrastructure setup. We would just simply add some basic tokens to the access control system, and then from there, ClassiDocs has the integration. So what you're going to see from the ClassiDocs perspective on the back end is the capacity to understand not just where content is stored and how it's classified, but specifically who's got access to it, and also the explicit details of that content. So right now, we're running live against a test lab today. We're classifying some content. We've got some documents. These are native files right on the file system on your local laptop or desktop. We can show all the permissions and all that good stuff, which is stored, again, on the endpoint. But now we're going to start doing against Citrix itself. And what we've seen in this case is you have the ability to obviously capture file name and location, and of course, how it was classified. And this is a really important distinction for you to have for your management reporting and also for a lot of your security tools. So what's happened in this case, we attached to Citrix, we said, okay, ClassiDocs, go scan the ShareFile infrastructure, here's the domain to work with, all that sort of stuff you use every day. And then what we did is we actually read all the files that are in that Citrix ShareFile infrastructure and classified the files directly. By classification, we mean we opened the file, the Word document, Excel sheet, the image file, whatever it happened to be, understood the contents of the file, and then applied your rules of the classification against those files. So let's say, for example, what would have triggered the confidential classification on that Word doc? So we're going to go to the rule set here for classifications here itself and look at the classification rules that we've applied to the infrastructure. Keep in mind, these rules are something you can apply and manage yourself completely. It's something that's delegatable to another person in your organization. We supply 350-ish rules that you might want to consume. A lot of these rules are pretty standard things like social security number, credit card number, government identifiers that might be from certain countries, and also any other sort of regular expression mapping you might want to think of. So we've got stuff like, identifying addresses in the UK and identifying what a IBAN number looks like, any sort of information you might consider to be sensitive. Perhaps more importantly than what we call table stakes regular expressions, these are regular expressions that are pretty basic and simple. We obviously enable you to add more rules. And this is where the magic kicks in, is that now these rules are something that you can delegate to certain people. And the delegation of these rules is really something that really differentiates your product set, because now you have, outside of IT, someone intelligent, hopefully, right, managing the content and managing the policies and rules that ClassiDocs will apply to files it finds. So a very simple example is someone may feel that Project Orange and Project Oranges is a sensitive keyword for the business. And this is something that we should be treating confidentially, and any information we find anywhere about Project Orange, we should be identifying that content as confidential. So what we've done in this case was we've put that rule in. We've said apply it to the whole infrastructure that is available for ClassiDocs. And it could be web servers, cloud drives, local drives, all these sort of things. And then when you find that information in a file, stamp it confidential. When we say we stamp the file, we actually do a few things that you can enable additional functionality from your perspective that might help your requirements. So if the file supports metadata, this is primarily a PDF file, Excel file, Word, PowerPoint, some other HTML files support metadata as well. You'll find that we're able to stamp metadata on the file directly, and that's something that you can manage from a DLP or security perspective. So I'll give you an example on this Excel file here. We have stamped some information in the classification of it and said, somewhere in here we should be saying confidential. You'll find another file that shows that. Well, what you're going to see is that we're able to stamp the attribute of the file itself directly with either the ClassiDocs classification equals sensitive, and also we could stamp additional attributes you might want to use. So in that classic example of additional attributes, I'm going to show you how we can manage some of these additional attributes from the perspective of ClassiDocs and have those added to files. So you're seeing right here where we have this attribute section that is able to be added directly to files. And we're able to stamp the metadata with these attributes, and other systems can read those attributes. So for example, if you look at your firewall, if you look at your DLP, if you look at other tagging systems, like a content management system, for example, they can read metadata directly. This is what they do. They say, I'm looking for this keyword, this attribute. Okay, this is confidential. I'm going to handle it this way. We also are able to stamp the attributes on a file system level as well. And this is part of the integration we're working on now with Citrix, is to make sure we stamp their attribute information that their APIs can consume and do advanced functionalities with. So we're working with the team on some of that advanced functionality today. There's additional APIs that expose attributes on the file level stuff that's stored in ShareFile directly that we'll be able to manipulate directly from this content, from this console. So what's really important with that is, again, when you change sensitivity of information, when users suggest different changes, we're able to automatically go out and reclassify, restamp that information for you, no matter where it happens to be. The other thing we can do with a lot of the content, and it really depends on your requirements, is we can do certain things to it as well. So we can add watermarks, for example, to all sensitive content. You know, if it's confidential, we can do that confidential watermark against the back of the Word document, for example. We can also add explicit headers and footers to content that might need that sort of stuff added. We have a lot of capability about how and when we do classifications, and even the interface for the end users has been enhanced to the point where now we have a lot of friendly infrastructure available for them to be able to review and see the content and understand how to classify systems themselves. So we have a lot of rules around classification. You're able to add additional content as you see fit, of course. What's also really important, though, is that now we have additional rules that might be suggestible from end users. And, you know, in this case, we can actually do certain types of rule matching around the file name itself as well. So we've had some folks say, I know everything in this folder is confidential, or I know everything with a file name that has this in it is machine generated and it's internal only, for example. That could be like a parts list or inventory system. So we see there's a lot of flexibility about how to classify that information. And like I said, that applies against all the infrastructure, including Citrix ShareFile. Another example here is you're able to test your classifications and add rules and sample the rules against a piece of content. If you're doing a little bit of modeling and you're playing with additional information sets and saying, I really want to know what this looks like and how it works there, I want to make sure that I'm flagging the information properly. The other big part we're seeing here is you've got the ability to manage files directly and have the end user feedback tell us what's going on with it. So in some cases, we're seeing that a user might say, this piece of content should be classified confidentially as opposed to the way the system discovered it. Okay, so classification infrastructure is pretty rich. You can add and delete classifications as you see fit. The main point here is that every time you make a change on this console, all of the scanners automatically receive that change and go out and apply the content changes you may have applied. So you might have added a few new keywords. You might have also said, hey, I only want the scanners to run at night and Saturdays and Sundays only, for example. So you can set those kind of operational attributes directly to the system, and then you're able to have that go on from there. Okay, so we've done the advanced integration stuff. You've seen the Citrix ShareFile integration there, pretty straightforward. And then we've also got, like I said, the ability for the system to classify files that are local and also distributed, right? So now we've got the capacity to scan, you know, anything on C drive, but also network groups or web dev folders as well. Okay. What we're seeing on the Classy stream again is all of the content that has been scanned as well, and also how it's classified. And remember, now we're seeing documents, emails, and external content, what we're calling external, which would be in ShareFile, directly classified with all of the same rules. And I think it's a really important distinction for you to capture. Those same rules apply to what we're calling structured data. And what that means to us is anything that is approachable from a database perspective. So we can classify email, like in this case, you're seeing a Gmail mailbox being done directly, any sort of SQL Server database, even MailChimp, for example. We're applying the same rules that an end user might feed back to you, and then also have that information pop in into your reporting system. So you're seeing all of this infrastructure, while I start up Word here, is exportable, right? So now you can start doing reports around what and how is stored elsewhere. And this is really important so that your management team, your CIO, whoever is responsible for inventory control and breach notification and securing systems properly, loves inventory because at the end of the day, they can't protect everything the same. And they also really, really need to know what is classified as what, so they can focus the resources on that sort of on those platforms. So this gives you an automatic inventory and gives that to you live as you go forward. What you can also see is that you're seeing we have the capacity to do some dashboarding here as well. And what that dashboarding does is gives us an indication about performance of the system, but also how active and how volumetric some of this information is. Now, what's important to say, volumetric is obviously a concept that has many different meanings. From our perspective, what this means is that someone added a lot of content to the system on these days. They were earlier this year in January, and the system was processing, around 400 files an hour from a classification perspective. And you'll see that we had a few pops here and there, but otherwise we're pretty stable. What that also means is that the policy hasn't changed much either throughout this time frame. And these classification changes would have driven some of this activity. More importantly, it answers somewhat the question that we usually get and everyone has, which is, when am I done, right? When am I complete the classification exercise in general? And what we see is a lot of people need to understand that, because we have the concept of, making changes, having that change apply across potentially hundreds or even thousands of endpoints. And in some cases, you might have to emergency change a classification or, firm up some rule sets. So you really need to know where and when things are complete. So this dashboard gives us some of that information. Perhaps more importantly, you've got some more inventory stuff in here. The biggest one, of course, is how and where things are classified. With some of the dashboarding infrastructure we have, you're able to click and drive down into that information set by file share, and everything else. Something that might be really important for you, I think, that is really interesting, is what we're considering data discovery and search. This is the same infrastructure that's going to be running against your ShareFile infrastructure, right? Remember, we're mapping to these services and we're crawling the files that are stored in ShareFile, classifying them, but also doing discovery against them. So when you have a discovery use case, and that could be a Freedom of Information Act request, it could be a GDPR DSAR, it could be a privacy request from any other region, or it could even be a legal request to go and find things related to this sort of topic or this sort of person. You would enter that search term into this console, and this console is going to go across all of your laptops, all of your desktops, all of your servers, all your cloud drives, all of your databases, and all of your other infrastructure that might be stored into things like Salesforce, MailChimp, or other cloud SaaS providers. So what's really interesting with this platform is you can enter a search query, and it can be very specific, like I said, with an email, Or it could be all very simple and sorry, it could be a little more sophisticated, it could be a regular expression. So the main point you're seeing here is that we're able to view the results of those queries across all the endpoints. And this query might take a few minutes, it might take a few hours or a few days, really depending on your infrastructure. And again, like I said, looking over the performance stats, you're going to know roughly how long this takes to bubble up results. But you're seeing specifically that email address has been found in a couple zip files on a couple of workstations, and it was also found in an Excel sheet and somewhere in a Dropbox cache file on one of my laptops. What's also more important as well in this case is we're seeing that we're able to resolve that piece of content, in this case that email address, and find it in databases itself. So when you look at your requirement for a GDPR, data subject access request, or any other search request, a lot of that information must be found in other repositories. Databases are no different. So we also search for that information across the ShareFile infrastructure and your database infrastructure, giving you a single view to all those results. So it's very powerful from a discovery perspective. Another capability that I think is really important for a lot of folks here is that we have the ability to now do what we're calling advanced access governance reporting, or reporting on how and who has access to what. So it's an advanced use case, and it's actually a enforcement of a policy you might have in your company today. So you might have a data security policy today that says, hey, at a high level, people should not have access to things they don't need to have access to. Great policy, impossible to enforce, essentially. Too broad, and there's not enough specifics in there, and Active Directory doesn't understand what that means. So what we've said is we're going to take a different approach, and we're going to combine the concept of identity, who that person is, the content itself, where it might be located, and the sensitivity level of that information. So we bring those four components together in essentially one big query. And this is almost something you would do in a SIM today. You might have, a Splunk query that says, if I see Jason having a file with this name on this workstation, I want an alert fired, okay? We take a step further and we say, we're not just saying this file, or we're guessing against this file share, or understanding, who has what permission. We're actually saying the person and the data may or may not have that. So we're actually bubbling up the results into a very much more granular infrastructure. So let's take the example here. I never want the group from Hong Kong, for example, my Hong Kong user group, to ever have access to information on this file server. And the information they should never have access to is something that we're going to tag as client confidential. Okay? And we want this query to run continuously. And if something happens, we want to send a SIM alert, send an email, and maybe even run a script, which would be a RESTful call to encrypt that file. So if you see what we've just done here, we've said an Active Directory identity, a user or a group, whatever you want to do, on a specific machine. We're saying, file server or workstation even should not have access to something we're classifying at a certain level. And we're doing something about it. That rule set can apply to anything in the ShareFile infrastructure as well. We can say that from a ShareFile direct integration perspective, i.e. through the back end that we're scanning as we speak right now. And we can also apply the same rule set against any file share that's mapped to ShareFile, or also any local workstation that has replicated the data down to its workstation. So what we're starting to say now is data security is much more than just access to a group, which gives you permissions to a file share. And data security enforcement is much more now about understanding the identity, the explicit content value to the business, and then doing something about it. So let's take the example of a normal file share in your business today, Drive G, everyone's got Drive G. It's a share that everyone drops files into and uses it to coordinate, as opposed to email, for example. Well, when someone from finance has read-write access to the share and someone from marketing has read-write access to that share, which is a pretty common condition, everyone's got read-write access to it, someone from finance accidentally saves a confidential spreadsheet to the share. You've now had a information disclosure of sensitive level to a person that should not have access to it. Marketing should not know everyone's salary. And also, now you've got this content in a file share that potentially hundreds or thousands of people have access to, and they probably didn't even notice, right? You could do a file save, forget you did it there, keep working on the content, and then save it back to your desktop that you were working on, right? If you think of that use case, it's pretty common where you accidentally save something somewhere else. In that case, that file could sit there for weeks or months, right? So what we do is we say, listen, you can't control, you can't manage access control very well. That's a pretty common thing businesses have an issue with. And even if you were really, really good at it, you still have some of these conditions where someone can accidentally store something somewhere where they shouldn't. So we say we should really take a better look at that and do a better job and have more explicitness around that query. And that's exactly what we've done. And this applies again to, almost any data infrastructure. Another important part that we've done here is also expose that functionality to anything on the GDPR query side or privacy query side. I'm going to rename that in the next version. In that example, we're actually saying, no one from this user group should ever have access to anything associated with this topic. And that's much different than doing a legal hold on email or something. This is really saying globally, anyone should not have access to this type of topic contextual information. So it's a really big differentiator. It's not just about classification, which is fairly unique, of course, on its own, but it's also about explicit patterns that might be sensitive to you in business. And that could also even be a part number, right? A confidential product list or anything else that might be associated to something important there. Let me talk to you about machine learning for a second, and I think this will be very important for your users. So this is Word today, very simple. It's the Word or Office that everyone uses today. We've installed the ClassiDocs add-in. This will share, this will allow you to save files to ShareFile. The files will be classified according to the rule set that you see here. ShareFile can read that content. Your DLP can read those tags and act accordingly. So this is all very standard, very simple stuff. And of course, it's deeply integrated into the Citrix ShareFile infrastructure. But what we also do is we're able to do some things like when we have content in the system, and we're able to ask the user to classify it for us, okay? In this case, the system has detected so far that the content is internal only, and it will be reclassified shortly to confidential, probably in the next few minutes, as it finds that Project Orange keyword. I can also, as a user, select the keyword and associate the classification that works for the system. And that works across the board in all of Excel and Outlook and everything else. You'll notice when I save this file to my ShareFile, that content is directly mapped to the attributes that I've specified. So let me save it as confidential, and let me go to my S drive and ShareFile, and I can drop it in there. So I should map the drive properly first. Okay, so once I hit a folder that I'm able to drop a file into, I can drop the file into, and of course it's going to be saved within ShareFile. And from anything else perspective, you're going to see that the content has been flagged and tagged specifically with the attributes around confidentiality. So you see here, we added the confidential tag, and we've also added an attribute for ClassiDocs itself to read as well. What happens in this case, though, in addition to end users saying they can file save or save locally or do whatever else, they can also do machine learning that is automatic on the system. So what we're seeing here is that when I do a file save action or when I select a new classification, it's actually uploading the machine learning based attributes of that piece of content to ClassiDocs. So in addition to having all those rules that I showed you a few minutes ago, right, when we have the classification and then we've got, you know, specific rules within it and we've defined, you know, really rigid text patterns and these sort of things, we've also got our friend machine learning helping us out as well. And that machine learning algorithm runs natively, just like you saw, within the Outlook or Office stack. We don't even need to even have this taskbar visible to have machine learning running against the content. The content machine learning learns during any execution of a change of classification, or if a system classifies it as confidential, it reads the content and uploads the results as a word list, basically, for each classification. This is the same algorithm that your spam engine for mail uses today. It's a very reliable and accurate and fairly simple algorithm. And the main point about it is that it picks up additional keywords that might not be in your classification list. Remember, our goal is to classify information as accurately as possible, continuously, and as up to date. I said it up to date already, but it is really about keeping that frequency very high. And whenever there's a change, whenever the business says we're doing something else, or whenever a user says, I think this is sensitive as well, we want our friend machine learning to start suggesting new terms as well to us. So the idea here is when you're in this console, when you're reviewing your list, machine learning is going to say, okay, you added Project Orange, but I also seem to find, you know, Rose or another keyword associated to the confidential classification. Okay, in this case, it's pretty low probability, but it might be something you might want to consider. And after you classify, you know, 1,000,000 times, which won't be long in most organizations, this algorithm gets trained very well. So you're seeing that we're really driving a lot of intelligence into the classification mechanisms. We're trying to pull information out of end users, you know, their brains primarily, and really having the ability to document the fact that end users and systems have a lot of information in them that should be in a rule set, in a policy system, or something else. And you have to work on getting that out of those, you know, other repositories, people's brains, and other data systems, and making sure that they're listed in the classification dashboard. And then that system is continuously discovering, searching, and finding. The same goes even for the discovery and search capability that, for example, GDPR might use. You might have additional capabilities assigned, additional rules in the classification system that would eventually apply to another data subject access request you've got in flight. Okay, so now you've got the capacity of, you know, whenever there's changes that machine learning detects or something else that's added to the classification, it can be applied to the system itself as well on the eDiscovery side. All right. Last little bit on the settings side, I'll show you some more interesting things as well. Something that we've been talking to Citrix about as well is our friend ransomware. It's a difficult subject. I think everyone has been hit with it some way, shape, or fashion. It's very difficult to protect against, no matter what the vendors tell you, as you understand, if you've ever been subject to it. And it's a fast-moving target. We've taken a little bit of a different approach. We're trying not to pretend to be an AV engine or this massive, you know, quantum computing encryption decryptor system for encrypted content. And we're seeing our competitors let's say, borrow our ideas on how to detect ransomware. I saw 2 competitors last week do exactly basically this functionality. And essentially the functionality is basically looking for files that have been changed and encrypted. So what we do with our agents that are always running on the endpoints, I'll show you one running right here, is they're always watching for files. Files that are changed, files that are touched, and even files that are sent in from a cloud drive perspective, ShareFile or others, and watching those files to make sure that A, we can classify them because we're always classifying data, right? But also understanding that if it's encrypted, there's probably something wrong. So with this panel here, this little feature that we wrote in about a day or two, you can now have all of your laptops, all of your servers, and anything attached to ShareFile, monitoring for a potential ransomware outbreak. And in this case, a quote-unquote ransomware outbreak to us is a mass encryption event. Okay, someone is or something is encrypting a lot of files at once. So with this dashboard, what we've said, and I think you want the threshold pretty low, so we said if over X% set by this threshold of files between scans are unreadable or otherwise unable to be opened, send an alert, send an email, run a script. Okay, so it's a really simple functionality. All of the endpoint agents have the capability built right into them. So in addition to classifying files and doing eDiscovery against files, we're also doing ransomware or encryption management or detection of files as well. And what's really important with this design compared to others I've seen, to be honest, is that this is distributed across all of your endpoints, essentially in the package for free. So you're getting some really advanced security analytics, UBA stuff right out of the box, just by virtue of us having the agent footprint on the endpoints for you. And this is really important because you're going to be able to see the outbreaks right where they usually start, which is right on the laptops or desktops, right? Imagine if you had a laptop that was offline for 4 days and the ransomware was timed to kick in at 2 days. That endpoint could be encrypted completely on its own before you'd even plug back into the network and just be loaded with ransomware and viruses and ready to laterally transact through your network. In that case, our endpoint scanner, which is sitting right here, would have a rule in it that says, I'm going to send an alert, but I can't do it because I'm offline. That's fine. But I'm also going to disconnect from the network. I'm going to shut down the workstation. I can run whatever kind of scripts I want. Right? And this is where the flexibility of the orchestration component that we were talking about earlier comes into play. Just like I said when I showed you the eDiscovery search panel before, or even this ransomware panel, you're seeing that we have the capability to actually do things based on condition. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that to take out of this session, to be honest, is that you really want to have the ability to do things based on a condition that you control. And that orchestration is something that you can fully manage as well. So you don't want to be locked into a vendor drop-down that says, send an email and that's all we'll do. You want to, trigger your SIM, which might be, Splunk or anyone else that you're using, Logarithm, ArcSight, Alien Vault. It doesn't really matter because it's all syslog. So we want to trigger that and send an alert right away there. And of course, we want to probably run a script and do something, disable that account, run encryption, disconnect that machine from the network, right? All those kinds of actions that you probably consider. The great thing with this, what I call the exit capability, this externalized script triggering, is it's all PowerShell based. So you're able to trigger virtually anything in the Microsoft world with PowerShell, and that means also you're able to really be flexible about what and how you do things. And I think we've seen a lot of folks being really appreciative of the fact that we're able to really trigger the events that would be specific to that organization. And what this means is that we're able to, you might have a different action for a UK ransomware potential outbreak than you would in Asia Pacific or between states or cities, right? There's always this jurisdictional problem where you have different policies and rules you have to comply to in each infrastructure. And we give you that flexibility to act that way. Okay, I'm just going to wrap through some of the additional dashboarding and see if there's any questions I can answer directly. I'm going to leave this screen up so you can see exactly how we're classifying the files. Don't forget, we can also do full eDiscovery against that, and then also apply some of the governance capabilities as well. Remember, we're tying in identity into the equation, and that's a really big differentiator here, where we're actually knowing who has access to what, and specifically what that what is, if that's a crazy enough commentary for you. Let's see here. So lonely speaking to myself sometimes. Let's just see what we have for comments. Social media, I agree completely. It would be fantastic to have this information being exposed to the social media realm. One thing I'll say is that from our perspective, the concept of managing, classifying, searching, discovering, any of that sort of stuff is completely agnostic of what the repository is. So the other way of saying that is, we don't care if it's blockchain, a database, Salesforce, ShareFile, or Dropbox, or anything else. We're going to classify that repository directly. And I think it's really important to call that out, because you're seeing that, you know, any sort of GDPR request or freedom of information request or search request has the ability or has the requirement to have you search against all these different repositories. And something that we're going to be talking about this fall a lot is how we integrate to over 400 different structured data stores. And, you know, about 123 of those, I think, are databases. So SQL Server and Hadoop and Cloudera and MySQL, you know, pretty well any database system you can think of, we can integrate natively to. But for me, I think, and for your management chain to understand, is we can actually classify and do eDiscovery against what I call cloud application services. So Salesforce, MailChimp, Gmail, Microsoft Dynamics, Zoho CRM, ServiceNow, all these other repositories that are actually cloud services, we can actually go through the content there that is stored in them. And again, these are islands of information that your business is responsible for, but primarily doesn't have the ability to search or remediate content against, now from a single console. So now you've got not only the ability to search everything, you've got an updated inventory of what's actually stored in these other places that you never had either, actively being managed in the system too. So we're adding a lot more platforms. You'll see throughout our demos going forward, we're going to have a lot more capabilities added here. We have, like I said, 400 to throw into the panel. Most of them will only take us a few hours to do each. And what that means is now you can put in ClassiDocs, you know, and subscribe to our SaaS service. Within a few minutes, you can attach it to ShareFile, for example, and have ClassiDocs automatically classifying all of your ShareFile infrastructure within a few minutes via the cloud interface, and you've had to do nothing on-premise at all. Absolutely nothing. And I think that's a true power, is when you have a discovery request, when you have someone asking, hey, what's stored in ShareFile, for example, what's the sensitivity level of that information? In a few minutes from us, you can have that attachment done and be classifying the infrastructure. And like I said, you've had to do no work or effort in that to deploy it. And when you start adding in these other repositories, Salesforce or OneDrive or other solutions that you might have access to, same thing applies. It's within seconds. We're attaching to that cloud service provider. As long as we have credentials, we're able to search it. And the whole point of that is that you can attach to it, but then take your time with the classifications, okay? I've been through many security deployments of technology in enterprise, you know, identity access management, data security, anything. And I'm sure you can appreciate a lot of people want to define all the rules at once, have everything perfectly set up at launch date, and spend weeks and months figuring out what should be done for this setting or how this should be applied. And what I find is that, of course, that slows down projects. It makes them very expensive. And if you have a high risk event or something else that needs to be resolved immediately, it doesn't solve your problems. So like you've seen, everything in ClassiDocs is designed to be very responsive to change. And any changes that are made are done within seconds and applied across the endpoints. So let's say you joined us and you said, I need to scan my ShareFile infrastructure. I need to classify confidential documents versus the non-sensitive documents. I need to do it very soon. And I don't have all the rules yet figured out, right? That's a pretty normal scenario where you don't have everything figured out yet. We can start you off with just 3 or 4 terms, for example, that are sensitive. You click save, we're going to go classify those files. In a few minutes, you're done. As you think of new ones next week, or your finance committee says, here's our sensitive information request, you can add them to the console. It's cloud-based, of course, or on-premise if you want. And it's something that can be done in a few seconds. And then now you will have the ability to immediately have the scans done and have that updated information repository, that inventory, and everything else done for you in seconds. Okay, and that's all resolved in either the Classi stream for files or in other documents that are stored in your infrastructure. The main point is you can say, I'm going to take my time with the rules. I don't know all of them, but I know over the next few months I'm going to have a lot of changes. That's fine. The infrastructure will store and manage that change and immediately push it out. We're almost out of time. I wanted to give you one last bit of information on the scanners, something else that we have not talked about yet, that we haven't released publicly yet, but I wanted to show you because we're going to, is we've now introduced the ability to do OCR against all files that might be in our scope. So what OCR is, of course, you're going to take a PDF that was scanned, for example. We're going to be able to read that PDF and classify or search against the content. We can do that against Citrix ShareFile as well. Okay. So now we can, if you've got thousands of medical images, or in a lot of cases, it's a lot of faxes, right? Faxes coming into PDF. In a lot of cases, we're able to do OCR against that content, discovery against that content, and also classify that content for you. So it's another example of us doing, all of these different formats and having, giving you that ability to A, understand what's out there, B, respond to changes as quickly as possible to the infrastructure, and also, I think more importantly, having the ability to have the system respond to your changes over time. And I think that's something you should be demanding from all of your vendors. I don't care if they're doing documents, if they're doing firewalls, or if they're doing patch management. They should be able to be reactive to your changes and frequency of changes. I'm seeing that a lot of people are figuring out their infrastructure. There's a lot of churn in IT, for example, nowadays. And, some of the stuff is pretty complicated and you don't know how the infrastructure responds, or you have had a breach, or you're trying to manage some of the security better and you have a lot of changes to manage. So, my parting thought here is when you're talking to a software vendor, or even a hardware vendor for that matter, saying, I really want to have this capability to be responsive to my changes, and I want to be able to say that, I want to change the rules 3 times a week, and I don't want to have to do a software push. I don't want to have to change out in an infrastructure. Okay. I think it's something that everyone should reasonably expect from their vendors. Okay, everyone, thank you very much. I think I've definitely covered the topic a few times over, and I hopefully didn't bore anyone. We are looking forward to working with you. If you have any questions or feedback for us, please do that through the webinar. You'll see very shortly that we will send out the content of this webinar to you shortly. In addition, in there will be a link to sign up for a direct demo as well from one of our team. We're happy to show you the infrastructure. And we're also very happy to go through a POC with you to actually demonstrate how quickly we can classify your Citrix ShareFile information literally in just a few minutes and have that infrastructure to be completely responsive and changing dynamically to your business needs. Thank you very much, everyone. Have a great day and weekend upcoming. We hope to speak to you soon. Thank you. Bye-bye.